Is he ready to rock and roll here?
Sure.
Well, I'd like to welcome all of you here to our first opening workshop of the day. My name's Lou Hong, and I'm introducing Brian, whom I actually know. Brian used to work for us at the Pocatello, Idaho State University campus. But Brian currently is working as the Instructional Technologist in the Treasure Valley Anatomy and Physiology Lab at ISU Meridian. And we might have an opportunity to take a tour of that lab sometime. Prior to that, he was the IT Systems and Classroom Design Specialist at ISU Meridian for about 3 years. And before that, Brian worked on the main ISU campus in Pocatello for 5 years as a Media Equipment Specialist and a Classroom Design Specialist. And Brian has a lot of experience under his belt. I think you'll enjoy what he has to show you today. So, Brian, it's yours.
Thank you, Lou. Welcome. Thank you guys all for being here. And thank you to Northwest Net for having me here today and putting on this great event. Like Lou said, I'm working in the Treasure Valley Anatomy and Physiology Laboratories right now. So what I want to start with, as we talk about the design process of the labs, I just wanted to throw this up there. And these are probably some pretty broad design challenges that you would have for any room, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, any kind of learning space. But the main challenges that we faced, that we were going to face when we started this project in building the anatomy and physiology labs, is we needed to know who was going to use the space, because we didn't on our branch campus, we didn't have anything like this. So we weren't really sure who were going to be using the space, what kinds of students were going to be using the space, faculty, staff, those kinds of things. So that was kind of the first on our list of challenges to overcome. Then how is the space going to be used? Once we determine who those users are going to be and who those students are going to be, how are they going to want to use that space? How are they going to want to teach? And how can we integrate technology in a way that it's usable for them? And then because we were so far ahead of the game in designing the AV systems for these rooms, we actually had the opportunity to say, okay, well, how do we blend the design of the AV with the design of the facility so that we're creating an infrastructure that can account for any kind of AV that we want to come in and plug in once it's all built. So much of the construction projects that we run into, or that I run into on main campus, it's a room that gets built, and then we get the call, and we have to retrofit a brand new room with this technology, whereas here we wanted to have the opportunity to do some simultaneous design. So what I want to do is, I'll start and kind of describe to you the lab spaces and what they get used for, give you a brief description of each of the learning spaces, and then we'll talk about the design process that we went through, and then I'll go through a couple of the rooms and just maybe describe in detail some of the technologies that we were able to use in those rooms. So there are 6 core learning spaces in the A&P labs. The first that you'll come to is our virtual lab. And in the virtual lab, we have some 3D technologies. We can look at CT and MRI scans in immersive 3D. We have these virtual dissection tables that are called an anatomage table. There's one there and there's one here that you see is being projected. And those let the students interact with the anatomy in a touch screen display. They're a 7-foot touch screen display. So that's what our virtual lab is there for. Then as you get back into the lab facility, we get to the BioSkills lab. The BioSkills lab is mainly for professional use. So doctors, physicians, nurses, emergency medical personnel, they'll come in and use that space to get the advanced training that they need. Right now, our hospital systems spend $10,000 per physician per year to send them out of state to get the training that we need, that they need. And so with this space now, we can provide that learning environment for those students in our region to come and get the learning that they need. So for example, if Stryker has a new knee replacement device, they can bring in specimens, and primarily what they'll use in here is unembalmed specimens so that the tissues are still soft, and the doctors can actually practice putting those devices in. So that's what that learning space is for, the BioSkills Lab. Then on the other side of the hallway is where we have our gross anatomy lab, and that's where our students are. That's where we have PA students, dental students. We have the opportunity at ISU Meridian to work with high school students because we cohabitate a building with the Meridian School District and Renaissance High School, which is the top high school in Idaho State, in the state of Idaho, excuse me. But we have those students come over and they use the gross anatomy lab as well. And that's where they get their lab trainings in that lab. Then as an extension of the gross anatomy lab, and you'll see the gross anatomy lab back here, right through the window there, we have a smaller space in that. We call that our anatomy learning lab. And the idea there is that we can wheel in specimens, we can wheel in one of the anatomage tables from the virtual lab, and we teach directly to a video conferencing system. So now we have that isolation. We can schedule it separate. We're, sonically, we're separated from the rest of the lab. So we can teach directly to all of the high schools throughout the state. The idea is we connect to those high schools, and now we can be supplementing their anatomy courses, biology courses that they're already taking. So they can select from a menu of courses and content, and that's what that room is used for. So those are the 4 core lab spaces. Then we do have a couple of other conference spaces. We have our executive conference room, primarily used in conjunction with the BioSkills Lab. So it's a space where professionals could come in, and a lot of the scheduling will be, for those folks, would be evenings, weekends. So this gives them a space, a clean space where they can come hang out. There's a little kitchenette in there, so they can have food catered in there as well. And then we have a smaller debriefing conference room. And this room is primarily for faculty, staff, and students for them to do collaboration, meeting space, some observation opportunities there, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a minute. But those are the 6 core spaces that we have in the A&P labs. So as we started the design process about 3 years ago now, we needed to put together a team. We needed to start doing some initial research. So we put together our internal design team. And at ISU Meridian, we were lucky enough to have a facilities manager who has experience in hospital systems and working in ORs. So he knew a lot about how to design these types of facilities. Of course, I was on that team with my AV background. Then we also had, of course, administrators and administrative staff, as well as architects and their engineers and consultants. And some of the early research that we started to do was just to find out what other people are doing in similar spaces. We didn't necessarily find one space that had all of the things that we wanted to be able to do, BioSkills Lab, Gross Anatomy Lab, those kinds of things. But just going out and finding those places and getting some research about what's happening in that industry. So we did have some folks who toured some similar gross anatomy labs throughout the Northwest. A few of us went to Detroit, and we visited the Beaumont Medical Facility there, which does have one of the first BioSkills labs in the country. So we visited that space, and that was a great learning opportunity for us to find out from them what they think they did right, what they would do differently, how they could improve on the processes that they're using now, how they could improve on technologies, those kinds of things. So that was some of the early research that we started doing. So then from there it became clear that we weren't going to be able to do this just on our own, right? We needed to actually find out from folks who would be using these spaces. So we created a couple of different user groups that we consulted with. We created an internal user group, which was faculty, staff, and students at ISU, and excuse me, not students, but faculty, staff, and administrators. And so those were made up of folks from both Pocatello and main campus and the Meridian campus. We do have a gross anatomy lab on our main campus, so we talked to some biology professors who use that space, as well as staff that would potentially be using the spaces that we were going to build in our A&P labs. And then we created an external user group because of because we had this bioskills lab, which really in the beginning of the project it was a very small portion, but we knew we wanted to find out more information about how that room would be used. We did go out and get local physicians, nurses, other healthcare consultants to let us know how they envisioned either them using these spaces. We talked to hospital administrators, find out how they thought a space like this would be useful for them. So we used those user groups over the course of probably the first year or so, and just had a meeting every 4 to 6 months to just kind of sit down, ask some questions, let the design team ask them questions, let the architects and engineers ask them questions about how they envisioned these rooms being used. And one of the great parts about having the external user group was that we got so much great information about how we would use the bioskills lab. In our original drawing, it was just a small 2-station lab. It really wasn't a big thing, and the idea was that they would use our gross anatomy lab as their learning space. And as we had those conversations with them, we discovered that they had already been through med school and they didn't want to be in a gross anatomy lab anymore. That space wasn't conducive to what they wanted to do. They didn't want to have to share a space with the students, share a space with some embalmed specimens, some unembalmed specimens, that kind of thing. It was too much movement, it was too much clutter. So that's how the bioskills lab really grew to a larger 8-station lab. So again, great information that we got from our external user groups. So I really like this quote. I'm sort of paraphrasing it here, but again, throughout all of those meetings, it was really critical to be able to pick out key phrases that happened over and over again in those conversations. To just sit back and listen was really key for me in starting to design the AV systems for these rooms. To listen to what these folks thought was important. And there were certainly some themes that came up several times. So I've handpicked 5 of those that came up the most often. And some of these I'm paraphrasing, they came out in maybe some different ways, some different language. But the 5 that I've got picked out, first I'll start with easy to use. So that was a comment that came up a lot about technology, is that a user's experiences with technology often is that it's difficult. It maybe takes more training than they want to have time with. We knew that we were going to have maybe some adjunct faculty that are practicing physicians that just didn't have the time to do a lot of training, and their brains maybe function in a different way. If they're used to doing surgical procedures, for them to come and maybe learn some new technology, it's not conducive to them. So we wanted to make sure that it was easy to use, that somebody could step in and use all of this technology really quickly. This gold standard, that actually came up quite a lot, and it was that phrase. I kept hearing, well, we want it to be the gold standard. We want gold standard. And I didn't necessarily, in those conversations, I didn't necessarily interpret that as, we want the most expensive equipment, and we want AV everywhere, and it should do everything. It was more of a perceived quality, right? So it was more of I guess a layman's perceived quality. So when somebody looks at a display, they want to see a sharp image, and that's that perceived quality. When somebody walks into a room, they want to kind of be wowed, and that was that sort of perceived quality that you have this all of these opportunities available, maybe at all of these different stations or something. So again, the gold standard was that sort of perceived quality that we want to achieve. Open spaces. Now that didn't come up. It's not necessarily something that comes up when you think about AV design. Although it was certainly impacted. When we designed the facility, that was a comment that came up, is that we wanted it to feel open. We wanted it to have a nice flow. And as we see some of the pictures that I'll show you, you'll see there's lots of glass. The Gross Anatomy Lab actually has glass windows, full-size floor-to-ceiling glass windows to the outside. It is enclosed out there, so you couldn't just walk up. Somebody couldn't just walk up to the window, but it has there's natural light. You can move around the spaces really easily. So open spaces was something that came up a lot. Common connectivity. That I didn't necessarily hear that a lot from the user groups, and not necessarily in that phrase, but that's something that I've got in the back of my mind. How can we take these lab facilities and conference facilities and standardize them? How can we make them similar? How can we, because they are all so unique, how can we make it so that if I go use the technology in the lab, I can go to the executive conference room and have the same expectation of technology, right? So some common connectivity, and then video conferencing was something that came up a lot. ISU has a pretty robust distance learning component, especially between our Meridian campus and Pocatello campus, as well as the campuses in Twin Falls and Idaho Falls. So video conferencing is something that we do a lot of, and it's really growing on our Meridian campus now as we start to people want to do more meetings, they want to do more collaboration, but also for accreditation, we need to be able to connect the Gross Anatomy Lab in Meridian with the Gross Anatomy Lab in Pocatello, so that they can have that simultaneous class. Somebody can teach from, a physician, adjunct faculty, or someone could come in and teach from the Meridian Lab, and the students in Pocatello get that simultaneous education, right? So video conferencing was something that came up a lot. So the way we kind of approached the easy to use comment was we did have, of course, we knew we were going to have some sort of touch control screen. So we made the purchase of the larger 15-inch displays so that it was clear that that's where the control came from, that we could place the control at a size that was really usable and visual. But then we also we wanted to make sure that we could use an iPad as well. So we have iPads on some carts that can control the system as well. So no matter where the instructor is in the room, because again, in this non-traditional space, the instructor isn't going to be attached to, we do have an area where there is kind of a teaching station, if you will, where they have some laptop connections. They can access a computer, access lecture capture, those kinds of things. But we know that they're going to be out in the lab. We know that they're going to be over there. And we don't need them, we don't want them to have to step away if they just want to make a change. if the instructor decides that they want everybody to see, you know, what's happening on the presentation on station 8, they can have it on a cart right there. They push one button, and now that display, that source is going to all the displays in the room. So those were a couple of ways that we wanted to make it easy to use and mobile to use the technology. Again, this gold standard, this perceived quality, we wanted to have, again, like I said, nice sharp displays, and actually they are sharp displays. So this is a picture of, it's kind of hard to get a real concept of what the gross anatomy is in one image. I'll show you a couple more images as we go through. But I noticed as I was going through and taking some pictures, it's really hard to get all of it in one shot. But so this is essentially 1/4 of the room. But this is also our teaching station as well. So we do have the touch displays for annotation, and there are two 70-inch sharp displays in each quadrant of the room. So the idea there was that when we're doing video conferencing or when we're doing presentations, the students are never very far away from being able to see a nice clear image. There are cameras, a audio camera, like this one here, in each quadrant of the room. So no matter where the instructor is, again, they're not going to be at the teaching station, they're going to be out at those stations, the specimen stations throughout the room. No matter where they are, we can catch them on a camera. So again, sort of this perceived quality by having the ability to have displays, have cameras strategically located so that you weren't trying to shoot through lights that are hanging from the ceiling or anything like that. We always got a nice clear image. Open spaces. So you'll notice here in the Anatomy Learning Lab, it is open so that we can bring in any specimens, we can wheel in an anatomage table. You'll see the glass wall there. There's also, I'm just stepped into a door on the opposite side, and there's glass here that comes out to the hallway. Now that, again, isn't necessarily worked into the AV design to make it be that. Although in the virtual lab you'll see, we have floor boxes so that we can accommodate different configurations. We built it we have 2 anatomage tables, but we can house up to 6. So being able to kind of move things around, do different configurations in those rooms was important. But it was mostly impacted, this open spaces was mostly impacted in the gross anatomy lab. And that's where it was sort of critical to have the AV design really sort of worked out, again, with the facility design. So the facility design went through a few iterations of how we were going to connect these specimen tables to ventilation. And that was probably the most important thing is to work with as far as a facility design item is concerned, was working with the ventilation in that room, because as you can imagine, it's a huge undertaking. All of the specimen tables in both the gross anatomy lab and the bioskills lab are all downdraft tables. So there's lots of ventilation in the floor, in the walls, and mostly in the ceiling. So getting AV to work around that was a little bit of a challenge. Originally, and I'll show some pictures later, but originally there was all of these specimens were connected to a long column of cabinetry here between these 2 columns here, and that's where the ventilation goes up into the ceiling. It did give us the opportunity to bring the displays down from the ceiling. One of the ideas in keeping that openness was that the displays were hung from the ceiling like they are in the bioskills lab. But with that opportunity, we brought them down, and now they're closer to the students so that they can get that nice clear image. But then we had to find a way to move around the room. How do you get instructors and students to move from station to station? So instead of, and again, I think I've got some other pictures that will show this a little better. But instead of one column, these actually became separate little pedestals that share two stations, one station on each side, so that there is some flow within the room, but we still have that cabinetry where we can have all of our audio video technology. We can have the screens as well. So again, some collaboration of AV design and facility design. Common connectivity. So again, we wanted an instructor to be able to do basic presentations from no matter where they were in the room. So we wanted to have some common connections. So you'll see there is some HDMI and VGA connections, and this is in each one of the 6 rooms. There's a Blu-ray player. There is a Mac Mini that they have access to. There is a lecture capture device. So they have, no matter where they are, they'll walk in and at least have some common core connectivities, and it was important for us to have those in all of those rooms. Another device that we have are the wireless microphones in each room. Again, because we do have the lecture capture, because we do have the video conferencing in each room, you can have those as well. And then that takes us, of course, to the video conferencing component, which does exist in each room. Here we are back in the executive conference room. Again, our faculty and staff are video conferencing is very common for them, so they like it. They use it quite a bit, and they there's a demand for more of it. We're just starting to get into the need for web conferencing in classrooms, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. So starting to figure out in a lot of these rooms, how do we share those resources? How do we share the video conferencing resources with the computer so we can do some web conferencing? That's kind of what we're looking into now. But again, video conferencing in all of the rooms. So those are the 5 kind of core phrases that we heard throughout the design. Now, of course, each space is unique. Each space has a different set of users. Each space has a different set of faculty and staff. Each space has very unique students, learners that'll be using them. So once we had that core technology established, then it was time to kind of branch out and see how do we make each one of these spaces unique in its own way, so that the technology will be usable by the actual students, the learners in those spaces. So we'll start with the virtual lab. Again, you'll see the floor boxes, so we can move the anatomage tables around. We do have a few folding tables and chairs. A lot of times what students will do is that we'll set up a couple of tables with chairs, and they'll come in and just use it as a study space. So that when they need to get up, they can go over to the anatomage table, or they can go to one of the 3D stations here, kind of check in. They can find the anatomy that they're looking for, be able to look at the maybe the CT or MRI scans that they've got for a case study that they're working on, and then they go back to studying. Well, what's really great about that too is that because our facility is open for any of our students, we have speech pathology students, we have dental residency students, we have physician's assistant students, we have high school students that will all be using this space at the same time. And that gives them the opportunity to kind of collaborate. So again, that openness to be able to move things around has really been important. Then we have, of course, video conferencing in here as well. There is a camera here and another camera over here. The camera here actually doubles as a document camera. So we wanted to take advantage of the technology that's already in the room and try and use it for as many things as possible. Rather than adding another camera, adding more equipment, we can multiply the use of some of the equipment in that room. And then the 3D stations, in the beginning, our primary objective in this room was 3D. And that's really what I was told, is that we needed to have 3D technology. And at the time, I didn't really know what that meant. And I'm not sure that the administrators telling me that we needed to have 3D, I'm not sure that they knew what that meant. But that meant that we needed to go do some research. So at the time, we worked with some of the folks at the Idaho National Laboratory, who had worked with in developing some IQ stations, or some cave-like stations. And they kind of helped us develop a set of hardware for these stations. And then from there, it was up to us to try and find the content. What kind of content were we going to put in there? What were we going to put on those computers that was going to make them be 3D? And we looked at a few things, but we had a hard time really, in the beginning of the design process, finding something that was going to be usable for our students, right? But it gave us the opportunity to have the infrastructure there. And you'll see, so there is, of course, the 3 displays, and then each display has a cabinet associated with it, and that's where any of the hardware of the computer is. So we had this infrastructure to go with, so we could at least start the facility design and construction. Probably about a month before construction finished, we finally found a software that we thought would be really useful for our students. And so it's a software called BodyViz. The students can use it in both 2D and 3D. It integrates really well with the anatomage tables. It has its own strengths. And then with that technology in there, we're also doing things, while we can take any CT or MRI scan, we can put it in immersive 3D. We can put it on the anatomage tables and interact with it in that 3D space. We can also be 3D printing any of those anatomical models, which is kind of fun. So that's another way that we use the virtual lab. Does anybody have any questions about the virtual lab? Or anything else so far? Yeah?
So the anatomage tables, they have like a funky resolution because of the weird shape that they are?
Well, they're a dual display output.
Do you have any problems? I noticed on the wall you had 2 screens that were mimicking what's on there.
Yeah.
Is it a scaler, or how did you get that to match exactly?
It is weird. Have you used one? Have you?
No, but we're finding out the problems we're going to be.
Make sure you check in with anatomage. There's a very specific. I don't know why. So they're a DisplayPort output,
right.
But there's a very specific scaler, I guess, that to take it from DisplayPort to HDMI. And without this particular model, I couldn't get it to work. I tried all kinds of Extron stuff that I have sitting around, which seems to work on everything else and wouldn't do a thing with these things. But they recommended this one device, I don't know why it's that one thing, and they work great. So that's, check in with Anatomage for sure, or I can get it for you if you let me know. Yeah?
Is there any technology that you put in that lab that isn't used by students a lot, that kind of just sits in a corner gathering dust?
Sure. I don't have a good answer for that. Because the facility is so new, we're still discovering what those opportunities are. I don't have a lot of students yet that are using the BodyViz stations. But we haven't done a lot to really present it in a way, and we're still working on getting some faculty buy-in. Because it was a directive from administrators that we have this 3D technology. But that was part of the process that was certainly missing. That there wasn't necessarily this faculty buy-in that they were going to integrate that into their curriculum. So we've been open for about 6 months. So we're still learning those things.
So on that same note, during the actual design phase, who did you speak with to try to determine what it is that the room was supposed to have, who would administrate it, how it was going to be operated and run after you implemented the technology? Who did you work with to make all that?
Sure. So we worked with, again, our user groups, which included administrators, faculty, staff. And about maybe almost a year ago, we did hire a lab director, and she came from the University of Utah, as well as our lab assistant who came on right after. He came from the University of Utah as well. So that was beneficial to actually have some folks who were going to be the front lines using the space. Yeah. As far as kind of choosing what technology, some of that too was throughout the design process. We were really lucky to not only through the design process, but also through the construction process. We were really lucky to have some great contractors, but we were lucky to have some great vendors as well. And Charlie here in the back was one that we relied on quite a bit from Avidex to recommend products and new ideas. I can go to him and kind of describe what maybe the faculty has said we want to do. What's the product that does that? So I don't want to single you out. You weren't the only one that we went to, but that's one thing that's really great about working with really great vendors. Good job.
Thank you.
Well done. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the gross anatomy lab. We kind of saw this picture before, but you'll see now we've kind of opened up that cabinet there, and that's where they have, again, all of the common connectivity. But as you can imagine, with all the technology happening in this room, it's not all in that little cabinet. But that's where we do have, again, the DVD player, the computer, the laptop connections, all of those kinds of things. We do have also some wireless connectivity devices, so they can they can display their laptops, Android devices, iOS devices wirelessly as well, so that they can be displaying content to the students from wherever they are in the lab. Let's see, the silver display is a touch display. I think I told you about that, annotations. Here's kind of what one station looks like. So typically there would be, we have these pedestals, and there are, I guess, 4 pedestals and then the 2 columns on either end, and they house some of the technology. You can kind of see there's a couple of open spaces there where we have technology. But we can have a specimen table here mounted to each side of the pedestal. Let's see, at each station they have access to, students have access to 2 surgical lights on arms that they can move around, as well as an HD camera, a little Panasonic camera mounted on a separate arm. And that's really useful for the students. As you can see, we can get a nice clear display with those cameras. But typically in a space like this, we can get maybe 4 students is pretty common. You get 4 students around one specimen and they can see pretty well. But with the camera now, they can get that camera nice and close, they get a nice close image, and now we can teach to 6, 8, 10 students who are seeing a better image than they would if they were standing right over the specimen. So now we can be getting all kinds of students into these spaces to see what's happening. It also allows us the ability, again, like in the bioskills lab, to if the instructor decides, well, now we found this abnormality or there's something on this specimen that I want everybody in the room to see, rather than wasting class time to march everyone over and have them take a look at it and then go back to whatever they were doing before. Now with a push of a button on that iPad, we can send what the camera is displaying to all the displays in the room. There are 20 displays in the room, 21 displays in the room. We can send that image to all of those displays, or we can send it to maybe the outside displays, so the students can get a nice clear image, they see what the instructor wanted them to see, and then they go right back to learning. It doesn't change what they're just seeing on their station displays. Let's see, the one other thing that they have at each station is they do have a Mac Mini at each station, so that they can access any of their reference materials. So one common complaint about gross anatomy labs that we heard from our external user groups was that they have this atlas, they have this book that they use as a reference as they're looking at the specimens, and it immediately gets gross and gooey and sticky, and by the time they're done, they want to burn it. They want to get rid of it. Well, we want them to keep those reference materials. We want them to have those reference materials throughout their entire career. So now we've digitized them. They can access the atlas on the computer. They can access any other reference materials. I've seen students in there looking up YouTube videos of maybe a certain procedure or a certain anatomical structure. So they can use the computers for that as well. Do you have a question?
What's your budget for gross and sticky keyboards?
Gross and sticky keyboards. Yeah, we're going to work that out. So we've actually got up their wraps, their saran wrap. So our budget is like $10. Yeah. I actually spent money on covers for all of them. And the idea was, that idea in my head was that if you had 4 students, say, that one of them could be maybe ungloved and one of them would control the computer. Well, that's not practical. That's not what they want to do. So yeah, they're all saran wrapped and it works fine. It works great. The lab assistants just, when they're done with class, they rip off the saran, wrap them back up, and they stay really clean. So that's nice. What else? Oh, so this photo again is a little better photo of the pedestals that are in the room. Again, it was great to have this cabinetry here so that we could house the top one here. We could put the keyboard and mouse in there to store it if we needed to. If we needed to wheel the carts out of there and do some cleaning, we can do that. You'll see the 2 displays mounted back to back on each pedestal. Also in the upper cabinet is a recording device, and this has been really powerful. So each one of these cameras has a little proprietary cable that comes down to a little recording device down here. So now the students can grab that device, they can pop in an SD card, and they can record what's being viewed on that camera. The cameras all have a built-in microphone as well. So an instructor could record a presentation just with that camera, or the students can record a presentation. So that's a really great device to have in there. And then down in the lower cabinet, that just stays locked, and that's where we have our transmitters and receivers that go back to our AV closet, which is back here in the corner. Did anybody else have any questions about gross anatomy? Okay, cool. So again, I think as you can see, it was really critical for us to have, I won't say critical, I guess, but it was extremely valuable to have the AV design early on in the process. And let me see if I can get through here a little bit quicker. What was this? I don't remember. There we go. So, current projects or future use. I'll just go ahead and put this back up there. So some of the things that we're working on now, there's a couple of projects that it's interesting to get to work on, get to see how the students use the technology. One of the things that I've seen both the high school students and the university students, college students, do is they have a club in the afternoons that meets, and they've been working on presentations. With all of these cameras in the room, now they've actually got one camera on a specimen, they've got a PowerPoint loaded up on a computer, they use another camera from another station to record the people giving the presentation. So they've got all of these opportunities for cameras and computers, for presentations and displays. They came to me the other day and said, we want to record these 2 cameras, we want this camera up on that display, and we want this camera here and over here, and send it to the lecture capture device. And we were able to make that happen really quickly. But it's great for the students to see and take advantage of the technology that's there, even though it's not necessarily intended for that purpose. A couple other projects real quick that we're working on are we're working with a couple of physicians in the virtual lab to get some actual patient scans and see if we can start to visualize their patients, maybe a patient that has a brain tumor, and then can we 3D print that brain tumor, and does that help with surgical planning? So we've got a neurologist as well as a urologist. Our urologist is working on a gender reassignment. And so we're trying to visualize those structures within the patient so that her team of physicians can all be visualizing the same thing at the same time in this three-dimensional space to do their surgical planning. So a couple of great ways that we're starting to use those facilities. Again, just wanted to go back and make sure that we were meeting our design challenges, who will use the space. Our user groups were providing valuable information about who those people are going to be, as well as those conversations determining how each space was going to get used, and listening for those key phrases. And then our involvement through the design process, I think, gave us an end product that kind of meets that gold standard, right? That perceived value. Does anybody else have any more questions? If anybody's interested, I think we're planning to put together a little tour of the facility. We're just about 6 miles down the road, 6 or 8 miles down the road. So tomorrow afternoon, I think at about 2 o'clock. If you're interested, let me know, and we'll kind of take a head count and get some transportation going over there. But okay, if anybody doesn't have any more questions, thanks for coming.
Trying to wake us up with some music there this morning?
Oh, yeah.